Thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you also to John for actually booking this wonderful space in this building, which I think was built whilst I was an undergraduate here, and it's a fantastic building with fundamental physics. Before we move on to our keynote speaker, first of all we're going to have a little speech by Professor Paula Chadwick. Professor Paula is a founding fellow of DIRDI, and she's the head of the physics department and an excellent ground-based gamma ray astronomer. And to be honest, without Paula, we wouldn't have the Institute in the first place. So thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you. Let's see if we can get things working. So I was wondering what I was going to talk about, actually. And the obvious things to talk about is, in many ways, how this all started, actually, which is a bit about students' intentions. So first of all, as Daniel's already said, I'm not the obvious person to do this, actually. I'm a card-carrying astroparticle physicist, which means I detect gamma rays from the ground, which is altogether an odd thing to do. And apart from holding a couple of patents in my time, neither of which went anywhere, I would say, I'm not an expert in invention or in industrial applications. And I really fell into all this by teaching undergraduates. So I was a shiny new lecturer. When did I arrive as a shiny new lecturer? 1989. And the first job I got, I was given by Brian Tanner and Desmond Evans, a couple of staff here. First job I got was, you're going to start the team projects with industry. I went, right, okay, great. And these rose out of an enterprise and education project in 1986-87. It was a thing in the 1980s that government provided funding for universities to create courses that were industrially relevant. Now, there are a number of reasons to want to do this. Many students had no idea what a physicist would actually do in industry. In the 1980s, you probably remember, it was the era of white braces, and most of them were going into finance. Now, there's nothing wrong with going into finance, but it wasn't necessarily using their physics skills particularly. And as I always say to the undergraduates, the great thing about a physics degree is you can do anything after it. The really bad thing about a physics degree is you can do anything after it. When they graduate, they're a little bit like rabbits in headlights, so they just go for the thing that looks the most obvious one, and in those days it was finance. Back in those days, they did no work in teams as part of their degree, and that was really a missing key skill. None of us work on our own, I don't think. Nobody sits in an ivory tower. They also needed that opportunity to apply their knowledge and to see that what they knew as a physicist did indeed have a use in the outside world. And also in the course, opportunities for being creative and inventive were actually rather few and far between. It was a case, thou shalt learn thy quantum mechanics and graduate. So they're still going today, I should say, and this is how they kind of work. So third year students do the project over one term, so they've got 8 weeks from a standing start to come to conclusion. And there are 4 to 6 students in a team. We don't give them any choice in team members or projects. And partly this is for logistical reasons. We just couldn't cope because the timetable actually controls a lot of what we can do in terms of teams. But also, it's a bit more like reality. When you start your new job somewhere, nobody's going to say, would you like to work with your friends and what do you fancy doing? If you, well, here you are, here's your team, off you go. So we do the same. But what we did was to give each team a staff consultant. We didn't call them supervisors because they're not supervising the work. They are to be consulted by the students. We would start with an introductory session. I used to do some very silly team games. We also include the basics of project management. And we asked them to do a project initiation document using Prince2, a cut-down version of Prince2. But they get an idea of project management for all that. We also make them do their own risk assessment, which is very good for their souls. What the clients do is give the students a roughly 1-page brief. They visit the client at the start of the project to get some idea of the context of what it is they're doing. Sometimes you have to do that virtually with some of the more distant industries. They might have a mid-term review with their client. Some are like weekly email updates, and then they provide a report and a presentation at the end, and sometimes a bit of kit as well, actually. So over the years, I developed views on what the perfect project looks like. So the perfect project has a bit of theory, or modelling, and a bit of experimental work. There's some obvious ways for the team to split the work, maybe 2 or 3 different topics to consider, that helps. Some basic work and some extension, so ways they could take it. And one for which I, or whoever is setting up the project, can imagine a way forward. You need to be able to at least think, okay, I can see roughly where the students are going to start in order to get them going. Otherwise, they will be wandering about randomly. Doesn't require very specialist equipment is a plus. Sometimes we do have specialist kit, and sometimes a project comes along that needs to use it, and that's okay. But mostly we can't have anything very specialist. It needs to be genuinely new, however. We don't want them just doing things that somebody has done before. And has an engaged but not too engaged client. So the ideal client is one who likes the occasional update, maybe pops in halfway through the project, but doesn't appear in the lab every day. We've had the odd one that likes to appear in the lab every day, and that's not so good. So as I mentioned, I don't give any choice to students over the project on whom they work. And over the years, I've noticed a number of things. First of all, teams of even numbers work better than teams of odd numbers. Which might seem a bit odd, but they were split up into twos to do things. And you've got somebody who's working with you, you can bat ideas off them, and if somebody's ill, somebody else can pick up the work. Diverse teams have better outputs than monolithic teams. And by that I mean teams that have got different skills, different areas of interest, so it's good to have somebody who's very theoretically inclined, somebody who's really good at the computing side, someone else who likes to build electronics. And also, of course, in the classic, dare I mention it, in the days of Trump, EDI issue, it's good to have people of different backgrounds, because they come at problems from different directions, and that's really helpful. The other thing I noticed is that they started out as a compulsory part of the BSc course. Now, those of you who are not used to the way physics courses run, BSc is 3 years, and MPhys is 4 years. It's what's known as an integrated master's. Some students are on the BSc course because that's what they want to do. They want to do 3 years and then maybe go and do a year doing something else. Other students, however, were on the BSc course because they didn't meet the marks threshold to get to the MPhys course. So there was always a bunch of students who, on paper at least, were quite weak. But actually, they often turned out to be very good at this activity. And I think there were two factors in there. Partly they were working with a team, and their other team members said, you're going to get on with this, even if you spend the rest of your degree sitting in the bar, right? And they duly did. But secondly, actually, an external client is really a great motivator. Having somebody who genuinely cares what the outcome of your project is really important. So this is what projects look like to me. First of all, the students would start out in abject terror. They'd look at this thing and go, oh my God, we have no idea. And then they go and try a few ideas, and they might be unsuccessful. And then they will all hate each other. Right? This was normally what would happen. And then somewhere, at some point, somebody would go, and a way forward would emerge. And then there would be an enormous flurry of work. And sometimes I would see teams, first thing in the morning, leaving the department. I'd be coming in, and I'd look at them, and I'd say, did you pull an all-nighter? And then we'd go, yes, we pulled an all-nighter, but we think we've got it. That would usually produce a good outcome. Occasionally, you get a bunch of students, they're students, they mess up, and sometimes the outcome wasn't so good, but usually they're pretty good. And then I used to find that the other students wanted to start all over again. So, we know what we're doing now, can we do another one? And of course, that wasn't always possible in the course. So some kinds of things we did, we've done stuff for Traceco in load cells for industrial process control, working with a number of spin-outs actually, magnitude biosciences being one, looking at the image quality of nematode worms. You can ask me why that's important later. Simulation of fabric wear for Procter & Gamble, fringing factors in transformers for Carolyn Maynell, huge transformers, investigation of teabag sealing for Tetley's. It always amuses me that the world's largest teabag factory is on Teesside, which I think is rather marvellous. But their teabags were not sealing properly, and that was the most common complaint from clients, from people who bought their teabags. There's tea inside the box, and we worked out what the problem was. It was the dye that had been created by the University of Cambridge. Anyway, we worked with Chromec, with Arnab's team, and you'll hear from Arnab soon, looking at energy spectrum, radiation dose rates. Muon tracking. Muon tracking is one of these ways that you can find voids in things like pyramids, but also more prosaically railway tunnels. Thermostability conducting polymer composites, Paratech, that's another university spin-out. Also, we did quite a lot of things with the NHS. There's a surprising amount of physics that pops into basic healthcare, actually. And what happened? Well, many students make their careers with their team project clients. Daniel. Yes. The work on simulating heat loss from babies resulted in a change to midwife training in the local area. This was a project that we did during lockdown where the students could only do things that were basically computer modelling. And the question was, well, how fast does a premature baby cool down? So they modelled babies as rugby balls, which they kind of are. There's some sticky out bits, but you know. And we're able to show that actually seconds after birth count. They cool down extremely quickly. And so this is now in the midwife training that tells them, as soon as you possibly can, get that baby onto a heat mat. Seconds matter. We've had several scientific papers. You can see a horse there with a bit. One of the things we were looking at was looking at how to measure the tension in the reins. When you're riding, this is very important, right? So you don't want to do terrible things to your horse's mouth. And we actually got a paper in some veterinary science journal for that. My name's on it, among others, which is interesting from the publication record perspective. When we contracted in this competition, we worked with a company that was making brushes for transformers, and there was a Russian company also doing the same, and we were able to show that yes, you know, their brushes were every bit as good as, if not better, than the Russian ones. We've changed entire manufacturing processes. We worked with a company which I will not name, but their process, they were creating creams for pharmaceutical use, and they were getting the black bits in the creams. And they were trying to work out what the problem was, and the students worked out what the problem was. They said, we think it's this. They said, right, we're stopping the entire production line. They all went, oh my! Happily, the students were in fact correct. But it would have been a bit embarrassing if they'd been wrong. But most importantly, we ended up with some very long-term relationships with industrial partners, of which Coltraco is, of course, one, which is the founding genius behind DIRDI. And also, I say, students in general, they do enjoy the projects, and they get quite a lot out of them. They're very motivating for the students. This then spawned the national project. So this was picked up by the Institute of Physics, and we introduced it into around 20 other UK physics departments, and I got a medal. That's the Bragg Medal of the Institute of Physics. It wasn't really for me, it was from an entire team, I think, more sensibly. And the links to DIRDI, how does all this link? So these are DIRDI's main aims. And there are a few things that I've sort of picked out there. So the Edison commercialization bit, this is really about the students looking at what they do and realizing that it has a use in industry and the commercial world, actually. And it's not just confined to laboratory experiments, which I'm sure they're convinced we invent to torture young minds. It's not entirely true. Identifying the United Kingdom's next Newton, that would be nice, but the important thing is whosoever that may be. And as I was saying, some of the students who are quite weak on paper actually turned out to be rather inventive in reality. It's just they weren't awfully good at sit-down examinations. And that also links right down to the very bottom, that inventive thought exists within everyone. Everyone has the possibility to invent. And I think that's something that DIRDI tries to bring out, and is very important for our students, again, to give them that confidence to go and just do something different and something new. And at that point, I think I'm going to run out of slides. No, finally, okay. That's the very last one. That's the other thing that you learn from doing a project from a standing start, and that is humility in the face of what you don't know. And at that point, I will stop. Thank you.
I just wanted to say,
Okay.
you are just magnificent. Right, I just want to say that none of you would be here today, and we wouldn't be here at all without this extraordinary person. So thank you for being such a large part of my life. And welcome to you all. Lovely to see you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Now we're going to have a keynote address. Some of you may have seen the initial program. Unfortunately, we didn't get the funding to fly over someone from the States. But very, very thankfully, we have someone of equal caliber and, more importantly, very local to come and speak to us. So Dr. Arnab Basu is the founder and CEO of the Chromat Group, based just down the road at Net Park, which is also where we have our laboratory. Chromat Group is an AIM-listed university spin-out, which is a leading developer of radiation detection and biodetection technology solutions for the medical imaging and CBRN detection segments. An award-winning entrepreneur with extensive international business experience, Dr. Basu holds a PhD in physics from Durham University, and he received an MBA in 2014 for services for regional development and international trade. He is a member of the new Russell Group Industrial Strategy Expert Advisory Panel. Thank you very much.
Niall, and thank you, the Institute, for inviting me. I was available, that was the main thing. So I'm local and I'm available. That's two important things in there. So I haven't got a lot of slides, so I'm going to call out your photos. I'm going to talk about a bit of myself, which I always enjoy to do. A bit about the company, the journey of the company itself, what I learned along the way, and which is particularly relevant because it is about commercialization of research that was done in this university. And then perhaps a little bit on the wider scope of where do companies like us or universities play a part in the overall ecosystem in a country itself. So, so starting from me, I came here as an international student, a mature international student. So I graduated in India and worked in our family business, which I always aspired to work. It was in the material science, which my father founded. And within 2 or 3 years of getting into that business after my first degree, I got completely bored. But also, more importantly, I didn't really fancy having a career working for my father and with my brother, both of whom have a perfectly good relationship still. So the only way of coming out of the family business was to become a student again. So giving up the interesting life in India, playing golf in the morning, going to work, and then coming back and all of that, I became a student in Newcastle. Became a lifelong Newcastle United fan, Carabao Cup champions, great, and started the journey of a second life almost. And so I graduated. I worked for a local company which based in North Tyneside, making sensors and some detectors mainly for the automotive industry. And as it had happened, and this is a feature probably of my life, it's reasonably event-driven. And I'll talk about Chromic, how events shaped Chromic itself. There was a big fire, and I lost my job because the alternative they gave me was they were not going to build a factory. It was part of the Invention group. They were not going to reinstate the factory in North Tyneside. I had a chance to go to China, to their offices, to work there, or I had to go to India. And luckily, Professor Brian Tanner and Professor Andy Brinkman had a PhD going in those days. And that company had a R&D facility in the university, and that's how I got connected. They took a gamble on me, sponsored my PhD, and I became a PhD student again. Third time in the university. Almost became a lifelong student. So when I finished my PhD, and I think Paula mentioned, the bright city lights were definitely bright in those days. So I had a job in banking. I finished my PhD, went traveling with a job in the banking in London. But the university ultimately found me while I was traveling and asked me whether I wanted to lead a spin-out company that they were trying to spin out, which was coming out of the same research group that I graduated from. So I came back from travel after 4 months, backpacking around Southeast Asia and India, and 19th of May 2003, Chromic started. It was, I always describe this, with one piece of paper in a room in Mountjoy. That was day one of Chromic, so I had to find a second-hand computer. So Chromic was a very simple concept in those days. So the university had a material science technology and founded a way of manufacturing a class of semiconductor called, based on cadmium, zinc, telluride. It's a compound, very complex semiconductor. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not really qualified to talk about it very much anyway. There was a method that they found of manufacturing in an efficient way, and the use was always in medical imaging. Medical imaging, security screening, or wherever you needed more information out of an X-ray image or a gamma ray image. So there was day one. We had some money. Somebody decided to invest, so we spun the business out, took it out. It was based on a European-funded research that originally was in 1990s. And Chromic started. And within a couple of years, I realized that the fundamental business model of being a materials company in a very large market where the adoption was completely dependent on a very few concentrated customers was going to be a pretty arduous journey. So I came back to the board and said, look, we got to change the business model. We just can't be a materials manufacturer trying to scale up the materials technology and convincing a set of OEMs in either in the security screening world or in the medical world to adopt this material and really make it work. So, and that is the time when we moved to NetPark. I have to mention NetPark in the entire journey of Chromec, because NetPark is one of those concepts. I don't know how many of you have been to NetPark, but if you haven't been to NetPark, please come and see what NetPark is doing. It is one of those visionary things back in 2002, 2003. Durham County Council, Business Durham, which is known as it's now CDDC as it used to be known, together with the universities, made an audacious trip to North Carolina and said, we are going to create Research Triangle in County Durham. And that was the start of NetPark. And today there's a thriving community of innovative companies and people working in that park, over 1,000 people working. So we moved into NetPark. We started the journey of proving out this technology. And I faced all of the typical challenges that any entrepreneur faces in Britain. First time CEO, so why would we invest in you? Do you have any experience in business? No, I didn't. It was a little bit like trying to fly a plane while you're trying to fly and learn how to fly it. So it was quite an interesting learning curve very early on. But as Chromec was developing in the early days, I was raising money through private investments, so in the private markets, and changing the business model, going from materials technology, going into an integrated solution provider. And then an event happened. The event of suddenly you couldn't take liquids on board because there was a bomb plot unveiled in 2006, 2007. Some people were trying to blow up an airplane using liquid explosive detectors. Suddenly the world changed for aviation travel. You couldn't take your liquids on board. 311 rule came in and everything changed in that industry. And we were about 3 or 4 people in those days in NetPark, and we said, why don't we devise a liquid explosive detection system? That would prove out our technology. And we did make a liquid explosive detection system. So that was the first liquid explosive detection system that was qualified and certified in use in ECAC, or European Community, and that is a product, the first product that Chromec produced in 2008, 2009, as we were also commercializing the materials technology itself. One of the features that I really understood in the very early days was we couldn't be a local company. Our outlook had to be international. So I was both raising money internationally, but also our customer base was global. So our first US Department of Defense contract came in 2008, and that continues today till today. So we have had an incredible journey working with the US government agencies over the last 15 to 17 years, providing various different things, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But as we launched our bottle scanner, the usual things started to happen in regulatory markets. Regulations started to go right. There was a drag in the market. And we, as a very, very small company, had to find ways to really innovate in those days to say, okay, as the market adoption is going right, what do we do? And we started getting into other product lines. And then 2011, by that time we had acquired a company in California, and in 2011 the Fukushima disaster happened. And in those days we had one product which was designed to measure isotopes, measure radiation, and give you very accurate information about what the radiation environment looks like. And that detector became the first detector to confirm the Fukushima meltdown. And that really started our radiation detection business. So over the following few years, I was in Japan pretty much every month. I started enjoying Japanese food. I started to speak a third of the language, which was they always use the word hi. And so that was the only thing I could speak. But it was an amazing time. We developed a whole set of instrumentation around the Japanese nuclear power plants, sort of shutdowns, and also what was going on in terms of recovery and understanding the environments. And we started working on a security application for radiation detectors, which ultimately won us a contract with DARPA. We got selected by DARPA to innovate on a particular radiation sensing technology, which ultimately today protects New York City, today protects London, today protects all of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine, and we have that technology and products available in over 50 countries in the world. So we started innovating very, very quickly over the following few years and became a sole source supplier into the DARPA program within 2 to 3 years. 2019 came, and again, our medical part of the business was starting to grow, which was a core CZT business, or the cadmium zinc telluride business as well, through an acquisition we did in 2013. And there we started to win some reasonable sized chunky contracts from OEMs where we were providing detector modules to go into SPECT and CT systems for the new generation SPECT and CT systems. And then, of course, COVID happened. And that was the third event that happened in the life of Chromec. What that did was we had delivered the program with DARPA for distributed sensor network for protecting cities and infrastructures against the threat of dirty bombs, radiological dirty bombs. And DARPA wanted to add the remainder of the weapons of mass destruction, chemical and biological weapons, and have an early warning system as well. And they chose us to deliver the biological part. And so what we have today, and we started an entirely new part of the company to look at automated detection of pathogens in air on a completely sort of automated basis, in a way where we can sample the air, self-select the biological particles, do a complete DNA and RNA mapping of the particles, and then provide that information over a network with the bioinformatics built into it. So you can effectively build a weather map of pathogens in an open space. So that program started in 2019, and really COVID accelerated that. So what is Chromec today? So we are a company of about 200 people. We are based 50% in the UK, 50% in the US. So our home is Durham. Our home is in Sedgefield in Net Park. We have manufacturing in Pittsburgh, just outside Pittsburgh. We have engineering offices in California, and we operate off another site in the Midlands in the UK, sell in 50 countries, and operate the business in two segments. One, what we call advanced imaging, whereby we are a key supplier to major OEMs like Siemens, Philips, Canon, and GE for their SPECT, or nuclear medicine systems, new generation of digital SPECT scanners, and also the photon counting CT scanners. We are one of 4 suppliers in the world, and we are the only independent supplier globally of cadmium zinc telluride material and detection systems. So we make full imaging detectors with integrated electronics, which goes into the scanners and which provides faster, earlier, more reliable detection of cancer, diseases like cardiovascular and neurological diseases. On the other side, we are what we call a CBIRDI company, a CBRN business, which is providing radiation detection to armed forces, security services, and civil nuclear partners for understanding radiation environments. And we have an emerging business in the biopathogen detection, where we have got 3 or 4 programs running both with the US government and the UK government today, whereby we are bringing capabilities that simply doesn't exist today in terms of complete automated detection of pathogens from air or liquid samples without any intervention from skilled people. So if you go back to the COVID, and if you have prior knowledge, you are able to use a PCR system to see whether COVID is there or not. But if you're in a situation where you really don't know what you're dealing with, even before people are getting infected or animals are getting infected, how do you build an early warning system? And we have seen, if you want to build a surveillance system like the PCR systems we had to build during COVID, you had to have a major scale-up operation. which needs people, which needs infrastructure, which needs a whole host of logistics support, which on a day-to-day basis, to do it is impossible. What we are doing through these innovative programs are basically building black boxes which can sit there and sample air and ultimately build up a whole pathogenic signature of that air in critical juncture, or deploy these in forward locations and really deal with unknown samples. We are an innovative company. We innovate as our day job, so we employ lots of PhDs. We have got very strong links with universities, not only with Durham, which is, of course, our home in many ways, but also with another 12 or 13 university and research labs around the world, including America and Germany. We as a company, really exist in a space where innovation and ultimately providing solutions to problems becomes our day job. So it was quite interesting to see the vision of this institute about inventions based on Edison's sort of philosophy. Research, what happens in the university is, of course, transferring money into knowledge, because this is where a lot of knowledge is being created. And if you look back what Edison says in terms of his inventions, his philosophy was, let's look at a problem and find a solution, and that's innovation. So matching up what is needed to what is possible is simply is innovation. And this is a role that universities play very strongly in, is basically bringing research out and ultimately create an ecosystem where some of that research is applied into innovative products or services. So in today's world, particularly the world we sit in right now, where collaboration and partnerships are an inherent part of how we grow, how we survive, I think the collaboration between academia and industry is extremely important. Some of the things that Paula does and the group does in terms of projects and things like that, which actually builds those partnerships, are critical to the success both of the university but also of the innovative ecosystem that we are trying to build ultimately. The universities plays a very important part, I suppose, in overall industrial strategy that is also being constructed at the moment, because ultimately innovation and technological superiority is what is going to be critical for our development as a nation in general. Even if you just look at the defense space and the supply chains within the defense space, innovation has to be a key part of how we build resilience, how we build our supply chain, which is critical for our national security and national defense of any nation, really. So on top of that, place-based strategies, which will play a massive role in local economies. If you look at Durham, if you look at the Northeast, Durham per se, Durham University plays a massive role in terms of the economic development of the city and the region as a whole. Durham University plays not only a role in terms of creating employment, but also spinning out companies, licensing technologies, creating research and collaborations which are high value, which brings high value jobs, create jobs, nurtures jobs, build supply chain jobs ultimately. So in terms of the role of the university in a place-based strategy is an invaluable role, and that is recognized and that is being talked about much more, but it is something that needs to be further nurtured and further funded and further developed as we go forward ultimately. But in a way, universities play a much wider role than just create employment. Universities create skills, universities create technology, universities create ideas, and it is the role of industries then to take those ideas forward. And it is something that is very close to my heart. It is very close to the industries that I interact with. And if you look at overall in terms of what Durham has done over the last 15 or 20 years, and what this institute is ultimately aimed at doing is really accelerating some of those journeys, is really catalyzing some of those things in terms of inventions and ultimately making those inventions really valuable through commercialization. So I will probably stop at that. If anybody has got any questions, I'm very happy to answer.
I've got a question. What would you say is your favourite invention that Cronix ever?
It's probably quite a difficult question. Look, I don't think it's about favorite ultimately. When your invention in a commercial environment has got quite a different purpose, it's ultimately the purpose is to create an impact on the P&L. So if you ask me what is the best invention, would be invention that supports our best-selling and highest margin products. So in that case, you know, the CZT technology, which ultimately brings a huge amount of growth potential and growth that is getting delivered today, is definitely the I would say the highest impact invention. Yes.
How dependent are you on a Chinese supply chain?
Not very much, thankfully. I was just having a chat with Kim there. We have been, you know, we run fundamental materials production units in Durham. So we have 150 furnaces that is producing single crystal cadmium zinc telluride in Sedgefield today, which is consuming a lot of electricity, a lot of heat, and given the UK has got the highest energy prices in the world to a certain extent, we were having debate whether this is the right place to really keep that. And because we have a production facility, slightly bigger production facility in the US, and whether we should move everything. But then, of course, the supply chain comes in, and two sources of our raw material in that area is in Canada and China, and both are attracting tariffs in America now. So we live in this very multifaceted world where decision-making, which seemed very simple, doesn't happen simply. But although we don't have direct supply chains in America, we use a lot of electronics. So when we make an imaging device that goes inside a SPECT scanner or a CT scanner, there's a lots of electronic boards and which are part of that component. Although our manufacturers might be in Malaysia, US or UK, a lot of those components actually traces back to China. And when you map your supply chain, pretty much every supply chain ends up in some way or the other in the Far East. So we are not completely immune to it, but we don't procure directly from China. But we do sell in China. So we have a market in China. I will be in China on Monday to Beijing. So, but yes, I think supply chain is something that every company is looking at very carefully, particularly when we supply into MOD, we supply into DOD, we supply into DHS and Home Office itself. But it's a very complicated picture, as you will know.
Do you think that, or I'll phrase it slightly differently, many of the most successful spin-out companies that I'm aware of, they still have at their heart the core knowledge that they spun out from, but what they're doing now is nothing like the vision that the spin-out person had in the first stage. Do you think that's a general comment? And in other words, that many spin-outs fail sometimes because, no, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're rigid, and you need the person who actually leads it forward to have a broader vision and go, yeah, well, we'll do that.
I think that's a fact of business, I suppose. You've got to be flexible, and you know, ultimately a spin-out spins out with a vision, with generally a broad vision of what the company wants to do. But how that vision is executed and achieved is almost not a straight line. And mostly it's not going to be a straight line. If I look back on our journey, particularly our journey, I mean, we spun out with a CZT technology, which was really a core materials technology. And although that still sits in the heart of our advanced imaging business, what we do today is much, much more diversified than what we spun out with. And that is a simple case of when you are trying to address a market, it's ultimately customer driven. What does the customer really want to buy? What does the customer really want? And more importantly, what problems you're solving for the customer. And that kind of dictates where you end up to a certain extent. But the broad vision still remains pretty much the same as that day one. We were always spun out with my vision from day one was always to build a company which is all about saving people's lives and keeping people safe, which is early detection of diseases and radiation detection, biological pathogen detection. But within that broad vision, parts generally diversify.
So sometimes some of the spin-outs, their vision is not broad enough, essentially. So they don't necessarily listen to their potential customers.
Business is all about listening to your customers. You know, they unless you're a market-driven organization, unless you're Apple, with that kind of leverage that they can shove any product down anybody's throat, generally you will have to listen to your customer and adapt and provide what the customer needs.
Onto that point, I guess you talked about obviously the importance of the customer. Obviously, it is important. Although, given the amount of expertise you bring to this topic, you must be able to see things your customers actually can't see. You can see around the corner, and they can't. So I have a general question about what is your product development roadmap like? How do you determine it? You know, because I imagine at your scale, everything involves. There must be so many opportunities to go after, and then how do you pick the ones that are going to be the ones where you actually put your resources on?
I think when you've got a platform technology like what we did in CZT, one of the biggest challenges is distractions, because there's 100 different applications. And one thing is for sure, if you chase 100 different applications, you're not going to be good at any. So at very early stage, you've got to take a decisions based on business cases, really, of what you can prepare in those days, in which horses to back, and you have to remain focused in some ways, but also keep an open mind in other ways. So I think business strategies are built on ultimately market-driven business strategies, which is where the market is going. Because if you look at the two sides of the business, they're quite different in how we construct both our technology roadmap and our product roadmap. So if you look at the medical imaging business, we are serving into a $10 billion annual market, which is basically a quadruple between 4 companies, GE, Siemens, Philips, and Canon globally. And you've got to be part of their supply chain to have any impact. So whatever technology you have, unless they adopt that technology, it's never going to see the light of the day. So in that market, we are completely aligned to what their product and technology roadmap are. So they made acquisitions and said they acquired our competitors to get access to that supply chain. We just did a deal with Siemens for a $40 million licensing deal with Siemens for one of our technology earlier this year. So you have to be really aligned. If you're an OEM component supplier, you're completely aligned with your customers in that. If I look at on the other side, in the defense and security market, they are extremely conservative market. When you talk about innovation in defense and security, it's almost considered as too much of a risk, right? So you are again having to really follow how far you can stretch the imagination of your customer, because in defense and security, one of the biggest challenges we face from day one, the customer wouldn't tell you what their problem is. It's a very difficult environment to work in, but ultimately it is again about looking at what your customer wants, how best you can understand what their needs is, and then go towards that next generation of what your innovation is in there. But these are quite difficult conversations. I mean, we have an experience of working with DARPA for 10 years on 2 different projects. And those projects are transformational, because DARPA has an amazing philosophy of absolutely knowing what they want, because the US government wants that for their national security, for national infrastructure, whatever it is. And they are able to pull technology and innovation in a way that I've seen no innovation agency do that. I was on the Council of Innovate UK, and our way of doing innovation is completely different. So, and I hope that the government ultimately funds ARIA properly and provides the freedom to ARIA to replicate the DARPA model so that we link nationally driven objectives to industrial base and actually pull that innovation into actual solutions. But it depends on market to market in terms of how you construct your technology roadmap and product roadmap. Ultimately, it's your customers. It's your customers tells you. You can provide the imagination of what is possible, but that has to match to what is needed. Because if you provide a possibility that is not needed, of course, that's just fanciful research.
I've got a follow-up,
Please.
a much simpler one. Why did you change from Durham Scientific Crystals to Chromac?
Isn't that obvious? You couldn't build a brand, Durham Scientific Crystals, could you? It was a great startup name, but when we started to become a products company rather than being a materials company, we had to have a brand that we could build. And so today, Chromac is a globally known brand that we can, so it was very much a change from a name that we didn't believe we can build into a brand to a name that we could build around. So. Please.
I have a question that's a more general question. You know how difficult it is to commercialize products, right? To develop them first. And I'm in material science, and so first you have to develop and comply to standards, and then eventually you have to find funding for commercialization, etc. And at the same time you have to be creative. And I find it difficult to reconcile both. Basically, especially encourage young researchers of my team to continue to believe in their creativity and passion for research when it takes time, money, and sometimes a very long time to commercialize something. How do you do that?
Great question, actually. I mean, ask my investors, they'll tell you. Not very well. I think it is a balance between, there needs to be, if you're doing this for commercial endpoint, and I'm always very careful not to jump on the bandwagon that university has to do research only for commercialization. I don't think that's the right thing to do. University has to focus a large part of their effort in blue sky research to really break frontiers. But if your research is focused on commercial output, it is again, what does the market want? Because there is no point in going way beyond the market, because you will then suffer the problem of you may be ready, but the market is not ready. So creativity, you have to channel the creativity to solve the problem that your customers at the end market really, really wants. And that is quite difficult in a creative environment, because when you put 5 creative people in a room, they will have 25 ideas, and then the next day when you come back, there's 625 ideas, right? But it is about how you channel to get to that point that you want to get to for that commercial endpoint. Mm-hmm. And what is that commercial endpoint? Because the endpoint that you're thinking will be the start of that commercial journey. And to have a very, very clear vision together with your customer and market to say, this is what I need to enter the market, because this is the threshold I need to get over. And that generally brings focus in a team. Stifling sort of creativity is never a good idea, but to direct creativity in a way that they're focused on an end goal or an interim end point is the only way to channel all that creative energy into a space. So that's what I found.
So you talked a lot about sort of market-driven research, which is obviously very important for commercialization. You've also mentioned organizations like DARPA and ARIA, which often support like blue skies research. So what would you, if it was up to you, what would you suggest are the sort of things you should be looking for when allocating those sorts of fundings to individuals? Because it's very open-ended, obviously it can be sometimes a bit difficult to judge where, which funding should go where.
Look, I mean, innovation agencies and research agencies are separated for a reason. In the UK, of course, the UKRI controls Innovate UK and all the research agencies. Innovation is different than research, and fundamentally quite different actually, because innovation is all about solving a problem that exists today. So when you're looking at DARPA sometimes may feel like a completely out of the whack sort of ask, but it is actually a problem that exists today. DARPA generally don't go towards a problem that doesn't exist today and is completely blue sky. It may be stretching the boundaries. When DARPA came to us, I'll give you an example. So our first program with DARPA was the way nuclear security is done to protect cities and borders or country, if you take as a whole. The paradigm is, for example, this room, protect the ports of entries and exit and put some detectors in there. And the idea is the bad guys are going to walk in with bad things and do bad stuff inside the room. But when you're talking in a city, the bad things exist in every hospital. The bad guys probably reside in that city. So those detectors don't make any difference. So DARPA's idea was, can you build sensors which can be ubiquitously distributed with ambulances, firemen, police, post office people, postmen? They're just moving around, integrated onto a central command and control server, and you know the location and the radiation signature, and you can build a heat map of radiation. So any anomalies you're going to put up. So you don't have to rely on ports of entry and exits. You're basically, so it is a paradigm shift, because not only in terms of the idea, but also in terms of what they say is, but hey, by the way, those sensors cost me $1 million. The sensors that you have to develop needs to be as good as those sensors that are standing there, but that's $400, by the way. So in that program, they almost set the commercial parameters within which such a system could be applied. And I tell you, the speed of innovation that we were able to deliver based on those targets, we have never been able to replicate in the company. Because there was an end customer which gave absolute clear guidance and direction of where we needed to go. So research agencies have got different role. They are pushing the boundaries of science and knowledge, whereas innovation agencies are pushing the boundaries of solutions that needs to be implemented today or tomorrow, probably. Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What's your biggest frustration in terms of being able to access what you think you want from university research?
Look, the interface with university and academia we have talked about for 20 years. Since I am in this field, we have debated this and talked about this in every forum I've been in, innovation agencies or local government or labs or whatever. It's the way industry can interact with universities still is a massive challenge. And like government, big organizations, they feel much more at ease to interact with larger businesses because they sound, feel, behave a little bit like them. We are SMEs, we are distributed, we are fragmented, we are everywhere. How do you interact with us? It's a massive challenge. I'm comfortable walking into a university because I spent a lot of time in the university. We know a lot of people in the university. But if you're an SME in sitting in, I don't know, in Bishop Auckland, how do you even get through the doors of Durham University? It's a big challenge. How do you create those corridors? How do you create these systems and interfaces which makes it easier and ubiquitous for a business manager or engineering manager sitting in a SME of 10 people and saying, I have this problem, I can just walk into Durham, find the right academic, find a way of working with them, have all the IP securities that I need, and solve that problem. It's still a big challenge. And it's not just to blame universities that they're not doing enough. It's not a trivial challenge. It is a real challenge that still exists today, despite everything that has been done to address that.
Actually, just on that first, you also suggested that Innovate UK was not doing the right thing. Is Innovate UK the way to help that? Or what are Innovate UK doing wrong? What should they do?
Oh, if I said Innovate UK is not doing the right thing, probably that's an overstatement. That's an entrepreneur's prerogative to overstate everything. But look, one of the key gripes I have with the UK innovation funding is we're not outcome-led. Innovate UK's biggest problem is we are much more focused on are the project costs accounted properly. So the monitoring officer who is monitoring your Innovate UK project has got no idea what you're doing. So you can feed them anything you want to. As long as your spreadsheet adds up to that milestone and the cost, you're good. Try that with DARPA, because the guy who's, or the person who's your program manager is the global expert in the subject that you are innovating. It's two different philosophies, I think. One is an outcome-driven philosophy, which means, yes, cost is an important issue, but I'm really focused on outcome. I really need what I want and what is needed. Whereas Innovate UK is a much more of a grant mechanism. Can I keep people employed in an innovation ecosystem and help leverage private sector funding? I think two slightly different philosophies, and I prefer the other one. It's not this one is wrong. I mean, in US, if you see the innovation, SBIR programs, for example, which majority of the DOE, DHS, DOD agencies will provide, they have got a little bit of that philosophy of keeping people employed and let them carry on with the innovation journey. But the successes of DARPA is because of that outcome-led funding and ultimately program management.
That does sound fantastic, actually. And I have an Innovate UK grant report due next week, and absolutely confirm they're not at all interested in what we've done. Just the
because the issue is the way we manage those programs is completely different. It is not linked to outcome; it is linked to cost.
Actually, if I may ask one more just on that, because you also mentioned that setting up the industry was like learning to fly at the same time as flying. How did you actually learn to fly?
By aging very rapidly. Look, it's a journey. It is a journey. There is no one right and wrong way. If anybody asks for advice, what I say is surround yourself with the best people you can afford. So I always knew, and I still know, that I'm an expert in nothing. And so my team are the people who are the experts. I'm not the expert in accounting, I'm not the expert in marketing, I'm not expert in sales, I'm not expert in technology, I'm expert in nothing. My role as the CEO or the entrepreneur is to really build a team who are experts in their own field. Because if you try to be expert in everything, you just can't do it. So the skill of a CEO in a small company is really to get the best team around you that you can. But a company is not just about the internal team. Company is about all the stakeholders that exist around you, which is your shareholders, your board, your customers, your suppliers, your landlord. You're, everything that you exist in an ecosystem, and that's what you need to be good at managing and selling your vision into. So, and it is about, in early stage particularly, it is about bringing everybody together on a vision. Because on day one you have got nothing, literally nothing. You have an idea or a patent or maybe a prototype or maybe a breadboard, and you're convincing a whole set of people that you're going to change the world in your own way. And it is about selling the vision and bringing everybody along on that common journey.
Thank you, Arnav. I think that's
Thank you very much.